Hello friends. As I do every election cycle, every election season, I could take a few minutes to make a little video explaining my choices for this upcoming election and why I've made those choices. Your opinion, mileage may vary, but I always like to explain why I'm choosing the candidates and issues that I am choosing. So this election was scheduled for May, but due to the virus, it's been pushed up until June, I believe. Absentee ballots are currently going out, so if you think you may not make it to the polls, certainly you can vote by absentee. And if you haven't already gotten your absentee ballot, you can certainly do that online, I believe, through the Secretary of State's website. If you have any questions about it, please contact me and I will do my best to put you in touch with the right people. All right, so before I start explaining my reasoning for my voting here, I'd just like to point out briefly two essential points of philosophy for me. One, voting philosophy is that I always vote as if my vote is going to decide the matter. I mean, it probably won't, it may, but the point is I think that is how God looks at it. I think that in God's sight I am going to be held responsible for the decisions I make. I'm going to be held responsible for my votes. I won't be held responsible for anyone else. So all I'll have to answer for is the votes that I cast. And so I always vote as if my vote's going to decide it. The second voting philosophy I have is that I don't vote for anyone unless there's a reason to vote for them, unless they've earned my vote. I think that's important. You know, we have a lot of uncontested races this year, and previously I would look at those and say, well, the person is running unopposed, there's no reason not to vote for them. Well, I don't look at it that way anymore. Now I look at it, I'm not going to vote for someone unless there is a reason to vote for them. Have they done something to earn my vote? I don't believe that anyone's entitled to a vote unless they've earned it. So those are my points of voting philosophy. Now, before we get into it in earnest, I'd like to start, as I always do, with a small prayer. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen. Father God, I thank you and praise you that I live in a country and in a time where we're able to choose our own leaders and set the direction of our country by casting our votes, and where the governmental authority comes from you always, but rests in civil terms with we the people. I thank you for the men and women who fought and died to give me this right and to preserve it. And I pray that I may always honor them and their sacrifice by voting with intelligence, with wisdom and discernment. I pray that I and all the voters who will participate in this election make the choices that are most pleasing in thy sight. And I ask this in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, your Son, who is the Lord of liberty and above all the Lord of life. And may Mary, the seat of wisdom, pray for us. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. All right, let's take a look at our sample ballot and get started here. All right, top of the ballot in this Republican primary for president. It should come as no surprise to anyone that I'm voting for Donald Trump. This is an easy one. Donald Trump has been probably the most outstanding president of my lifetime, or at least maybe I was too young when Reagan was around, but Donald Trump's commitment to life, commitment to conservative values and religious freedom has been absolutely unparalleled. I know last general election, there were a lot of us who were worried that Donald Trump maybe wasn't conservative enough. Well, obviously that's been proven wrong. And the most important thing a president can do, as far as I am concerned, to advance pro-life is, of course, to appoint judges and Supreme Court justices. And Donald Trump has certainly appointed two great justices, as well as many Court of Appeals judges. And I'm particularly proud that he stood behind Brett Kavanaugh during that ridiculous sideshow that went on in the U.S. Senate. Now, everyone knows that the real reason that the left fought against Brett Kavanaugh so viciously was because he was replacing Justice Kennedy, who they believed was popularly thought to be the one vote that was keeping Roe versus Wade in place. And maybe he was, time will tell. And I tell you, without President Trump's support, the left very well may have succeeded in derailing the Kavanaugh nomination. So that is what I think is the shining moment of his presidency, and that's why I'm doing everything I can to see him reelected, starting with this vote right here to renominate him for president. All right, next on the ballot is for U.S. Senate from Georgia, David Perdue. I am voting to renominate David Perdue for another term. He's been a strong fighter in the Senate for life and for advancing the Trump agenda. As I mentioned earlier, not only has Donald Trump appointed great Supreme Court justices, but I think probably his more important and longer lasting impact on the judiciary is going to be his nomination of Court of Appeals judges. The Supreme Court hears very few cases a year, maybe 1 to 2% of all the cases that it's asked to hear. So most cases in the federal courts are going to be resolved by the federal courts of appeal. And the president has appointed a record number of judges to these courts, with young judges with conservative values that are going to last for a generation or more. And the Senate, under the leadership of Senator McConnell with David Perdue, have been working at an absolutely breakneck pace to get these judges processed, reviewed, vetted, and confirmed. Now, these are lifetime appointments, so every one of these judges is going to have a significant impact for years to come. Even the famously liberal Ninth Circuit, based in San Francisco, now has a majority of Republican appointed judges. The circuits are basically regions of the country. The country is divided up into circuits, and every circuit has a court of appeals. So with the Ninth Circuit, when liberal activist groups would have a case that they want to bring and get a liberal ruling, they would file it in California or somewhere around there, so it would go to the Ninth Circuit, which was very liberal. And now, for the first time in history, if I'm not mistaken, it has a majority Republican judges, and that's due to great work from Donald Trump and David Perdue. I couldn't be happier with the job he's doing, so he's earned my vote. I'll be voting for him. All right. Next, for Congress, and that is my congressman from this district is Barry Loudermilk. I like Barry Loudermilk a lot. I believe he's very well respected in the White House, certainly, and among his Republican colleagues in the House. He's been a great supporter of President Trump, and when the Republicans take Congress back this November, I believe Loudermilk is going to play an even bigger and more prominent role in advancing the Trump agenda. Now, I remember many years ago when he was Senator Loudermilk of our Georgia State Senate, speaking very passionately on the Senate floor in favor of Georgia's 20-week abortion ban bill, which I was volunteering for at that time. And so that stuck with me. He's doing a great job. I think that taking Congress back from Nancy Pelosi and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is going to start by renominating and re-electing Barry Loudermilk to Congress. So yes, he'll have my support there. All right, next, State Senate from this district, Bruce Thompson. This is my favorite race. This is my favorite person I'm most excited about voting for this election cycle is Bruce Thompson. He is great. I don't have a negative thing to say about him. I could go on all day about Bruce Thompson. The last I saw of him, he was speaking very passionately about his family story at the kickoff of our 40 Days for Life. He doesn't just talk pro-life like many politicians just talk pro-life, and they vote pro-life, don't get me wrong, but Senator Thompson is different. His whole life story is about standing for life. He's an adoptive father, and he loves to tell the story about how he and Mrs. Thompson adopted a baby who was at serious risk of being aborted. And so he doesn't just talk, he stands up and he lives what he's talking about. He even shared some of that in the state Senate when they were debating the heartbeat bill. It's my great privilege to vote for Bruce Thompson. And of course, he's a former wrestler also. That's a plus in my book. I think wrestling instills a lot of good values and positive work ethic. Let's see. Georgia House of Representatives, 21st District. This one I am voting for and volunteering for Brad Thomas's campaign. Our current state representative, Scott Turner, is not running for re-election. The last I saw, Brad Thomas was the only one endorsed by Georgia Life Alliance, which is the National Right to Life affiliate here in Georgia. I really have nothing against the other candidates. I mean, they're all good Republicans. One of them's a neighbor of mine. I like him a lot. But I know Brad Thomas and his team. He's a small business owner, a Navy veteran. I believe that he's going to be the only, or at least one of the only, engineers in the General Assembly. You know, there are a lot of lawyers, businessmen, but I don't know any engineers. So anyway, I know Brad from when he stepped in at the very last minute to ensure that the Cherokee County Republican Party would have a float in our 4th of July parade for the city of Woodstock. He came through at the last minute for us, really did a great job. I don't agree with him on everything, especially the Woodstock annexation. We kind of part ways on that, but overall I think he's going to make us very proud. I think he has a practical engineering mind that we're going to need in the General Assembly. So that's why I'm supporting him. Keep in mind that if there are candidates that I pass over, not addressing, it's just, as I said earlier, I don't really have anything to say about them. They don't, like the unopposed races for, think, Public Service Commissioner or something like that. Nothing has stuck out to me that is particularly bad about any of them, but also there's nothing that I can say that they've earned my vote by doing this or by doing that. So I'll just skip over those races rather than make any comment. All right, skip over a few here. And oh boy, all right. Next election that I want to talk about is the Cherokee County Coroner's race. I'm supporting Don Ware for this race for two reasons. I want to spend a little bit of time with this one. This is one of the most bizarre races you've ever seen. One, I think that Don Ware is the best person for the job. Don't get me wrong. And two, the second reason I'm voting for Don is because he has been the victim of some of the most outrageous, vitriolic, over-the-top political attacks that I have ever seen, really, in any race, much less a race for coroner. And I believe that we need to send a message. I think we need to send a message that kind of shameful, dirty politics will find no welcome here in Cherokee County. Will find no welcome. I'll tell you what I mean. There's this very small but shriekingly loud group of troublemakers that they've been running some sort of a demented anti-Don Ware crusade. Now, I don't know what he did to tick these people off. Maybe they're upset with him being the chairman of the Cherokee County Republican Party, which he was for a year, and he was vice chairman before that. Maybe they're upset about something that he did then. I don't know. But these people have truly gone berserk. They've created this fake campaign website. They used some internet anonymity firm in Florida, I think, to create this thing so they could shield themselves from anyone finding out who they are. This site, it looks like a campaign site for Don Ware, but when you go to it, It's all these caustic attacks. Dunn did this 20 years ago and he did that 20 years ago. None of it is related to the office of coroner. They're just using it to bash Don Ware and say that he's an evil person. He did 20 years ago, this happened, and oh my God. They are just consumed with rage. And it extends to anyone who is in any way supportive of Don Ware. I called them out on Facebook a couple of months ago now, when this fake site first hit the Facebook. Oh my God! One of these people threatened to sue me, and one of them tried to drag a Georgia Supreme Court justice into this coroner's race by name. Now, oh my, this all is unbelievable. It's really quite bizarre. You know, I can understand people getting emotionally, wound up when you're talking about a race for like president or Congress or governor or senator. Not so much the coroner, It would be funny if this weren't actually happening. Coroner to me is one of those things that's a little more functional than political. So that makes me to believe that their crusade is more about just personal hatred against this person. It kind of reminds me of Trump derangement syndrome. It really does. Now, I know one of the candidates for, one of the opponents for this office, and Eddie Parker, and I don't believe that his campaign has anything to do with this demented spite crusade that is being run against Don Ware. I know his campaign manager personally, and I verified that personally. The other opponent, Sally Sims, on her Facebook page, she was very defensive when I asked her to condemn that behavior. So take that for what it is. Anyway, that's probably the most important reason to vote for Don Ware for coroner, is to send a message. This kind of nonsense, Trump derangement syndrome, Ware derangement syndrome, this bizarre hate-filled politics is not here in Cherokee County. Take it somewhere else. We're Republicans here, and we're better than that. Also, as I mentioned earlier, I think Don Ware is the best person for the job. He has a law enforcement background, which is vital for the office of coroner. Many people confuse coroner and medical examiner. A coroner is not a doctor. A coroner is not a medical examiner. In fact, in many small towns in Georgia, the mayor serves as the coroner, but there's a special provision in Georgia law. The medical examiner is a doctor, like you see on CSI, performing the autopsy. This person died from a gunshot wound. This person was strangled. The job of the coroner is to examine all the facts, which may include the medical examiner's report, and probably does, to determine the circumstances surrounding the death and whether it should be referred to further investigation as possible foul play. You may have heard of coroner's juries. They use coroner's juries in Georgia to assist the coroner in examining all the facts and make a recommendation or a finding to the coroner. Yes, this was a case of homicide. This was a suicide. Things like that. So the coroner is not a doctor. Don't be confused about that. The coroner is not a medical professional. Really, the coroner is a kind of a judge, or at least a law enforcement investigator. The way I've described it recently is that a medical examiner would look at Jeffrey Epstein and say, Jeffrey Epstein died from a broken neck due to hanging. A coroner would determine whether Jeffrey Epstein killed himself. He didn't. So that's it. Vote Don Ware. 1, he's the best person for the job, and 2, these bitter, angry, hate-filled politics is not welcome here in Cherokee County. All right, the next one I want to talk about, Cherokee County Commission District 3. I'm going to be voting for Hayden Holcomb for that seat. This is the commission district in Canton. I believe he's been very active in reaching out to understand the issues that are affecting this county and the things that are important to us as residents of this county. I've only met the current commissioner maybe once or twice, just a brief handshake at an event. I think Hayden Holcomb is going to be more proactive in reaching out and letting people be more involved in the county government process. I think that's important. One of the things that he also said that's really important to me is that he wants to build stronger relationships between the county and the cities. And there have been some bad blood between county and cities in some way. When you have a lawsuit that's going on between the city of Woodstock or the city of whatever versus the county of Cherokee, all that does is eat up taxpayer dollars. The lawyers have to deal with it. They're getting paid by the taxpayers. That uses up court time. They're getting paid by the taxpayers. So I think better relationships there are good. I'm also happy to see younger people getting involved in politics from Congress, as I'll talk about later on, and all the way on down. I think Hayden is very proactive in terms of, as I said, accessibility and working to build these positive relationships. And so my vote is for Hayden Holcomb for commissioner. Now, the Republican Party has 3 ballot questions on the ballot, and I'll address each of them. The first question is about school choice. And I support school choice. I'm going to be voting yes on question 1. And really, this question expresses the Republican Party's support for the state education dollars that would be spent on a student. That money should be able to follow the student wherever they go, whether it's a private school or public school, a charter school, whatever school best fits that student. I don't think that parents should be forced to send their children to a school that's failing just because they're not rich enough to afford a private school. So question 1, I'm going to vote yes for. School choice, I am for. All right, question 2 asks, should voting in Republican primaries be limited to voters who are registered as Republicans? In Georgia, we have what are called wide open primaries, which means anybody can vote in any party's primary. Now, you can only vote in one. I can't go vote in the Republican Party and the Democratic Party primary at the same time. But if I want to vote in the Republican primary one year and a Democratic primary in another year, I can do that. You don't have to be a registered Republican or registered Democrat. And sometimes the party's going to use that to their advantage or cause problems within the other party. For example, you'll vote in the other party's election for a particularly bad candidate in the primary just to give your own party a better chance in the general election. And this question asks, should that be stopped? Should we limit voting in Republican primaries to registered Republicans? I'm going to say no. No, and here's why. First, as a general philosophical thing, I don't think that I or anyone else should have to register with the government what political party I belong to or how I usually vote. And now, I have no problem saying I'm a Republican. I have no problem shouting to the world that I'm a Republican. I'm making this video. But if somebody wants to keep that private, or wants to be more moderate, wants to be a swing voter, hey, they should be allowed to. That's their right. I think that they should be allowed to keep that private. Should not have to register with the government. Second, as a practical matter, sometimes in certain areas the political power is so skewed in one direction that the only way you can really make your voice heard is to vote in a primary. I'll give you an example. I used to vote in Athens. I live in Athens, where in Athens, Georgia, no Republican has the slightest glimmer of a chance of being elected, except for those state districts where they take Athens and lump it in with the neighboring counties that have sense. I remember once I had to ask for a Democratic ballot in Athens because I wanted to vote for someone, I think it was Judge Coleman, in the Democratic primary against an incumbent. That's the only way that I would have had an actual chance to express my dissatisfaction with the incumbent, is to vote in the Democratic primary, because whoever won that primary is going to win the race. So, and I appreciated having that right, being able to do that, because I could make my voice heard. So, those reasons, that's why I'm going to say no to question 2. Question 3 asks, should Board of Education members be required to disclose their party affiliation? I'm on the fence on this one, but I'm going to lean no. Whether someone is a Republican or Democrat doesn't really tell me what kind of an educator they're going to be, necessarily. Now, of course, board members aren't teachers. I understand that they're more like education policy setters. You know, they set the direction and the policy for the school. But I don't know. I still tend to think that this is an area where education credentials matter a lot more than party affiliation. I could be persuaded, I suppose, and I'm not a firm no on it, but I'm leaning no. I don't want to have a situation where somebody gets elected to a school board just because they're a member of the right political party and not because they're qualified in education policy. So, I'm leaning no on that. All right, let's now discuss the judicial races. Now, this is a final race for the judicial seats. These statewide judicial seats here are not partisan. They're not Republican or Democrat. So on these races, it's the final election. And there are a number of Court of Appeals seats and some local races. There are also 2 Georgia Supreme Court seats that are up for election that I wanted to discuss. The first one is for Justice Charlie Bethel's seat. Justice Charles Jones Bethel, no relation, but I thought that was kind of cool when I found that out. He's running for re-election. Actually, he's running for election because he was appointed to his seat. He used to be Senator Charlie Bethel. He's being challenged by former State Representative Beth Beskin. I don't usually vote for justices, but I am going to vote for Justice Bethel in this case, and I urge you to do the same, and here's why. Beth Beskin, to be quite blunt about it, is a pro-abortion liberal who's running for the Supreme Court. You can see the problem. I can understand a judicial nominee like not wanting to complete a questionnaire for groups like the Georgia Life Alliance. I understand that because obviously they don't want to bias themselves and don't want to create a ethic violation. But Beth Beskin, according to the Georgia Life Alliance, Beth Beskin actually told their board that she's pro-abortion. Now, of course, she said she was pro-choice, is the term that they use. I never use that term. I say pro-abortion because that's what it is. So that's it for me right there. We do not need pro-abortion advocates on a Supreme Court, even a state Supreme Court. Keep in mind that when Roe versus Wade gets overturned, may the Lord haste the day, it's not going to just ban abortions altogether. What it's going to do is return the abortion issue to the states, which is where it was before Roe versus Wade. Each state was allowed to decide what it wanted to do. Now, state Supreme Courts would still have the power to say, okay, Roe versus Wade is overturned, but our state Supreme Court, I think our state constitution allows abortion. They will still have the power to do that. State Supreme Courts are the final authority when it comes to interpreting their state constitution. And some state Supreme Courts have done that even to this day. Tennessee, maybe Kansas, I'm not sure. Anyway, we don't need an abortion advocate on the Georgia Supreme Court, period. Also, when she was in the State House, Beth Beskin torpedoed the State Religious Freedom Restoration Act. She was on the House Judiciary Committee and voted for a poison pill amendment, claiming that, all religious people wanted to do was to discriminate against people and all that nonsense. But so for that reason, I want to support Justice Bethel over Beth Beskin. I encourage you to do the same. Next is the seat of Sarah Hawkins Warren. Again, she was appointed to her seat when a vacancy occurred, and so she's running for her first election. I'm voting for Justice Warren not so much because I like her or dislike her, but because the other person distresses me. She's being opposed by Mr. Morose. On his website, he doesn't really have a lot of substance, but he does rail against Georgia's 13th juror rule. And let me explain what this is. It's an important check and balance in criminal cases where a judge in a criminal case, the jury returns a guilty verdict, but the judge is really saying, look, that verdict is so much against the weight of this evidence. The judge has the authority to say, the evidence is contrary to that verdict, I'm going to order a new trial. And that's a check and balance. It's a check and balance just in case the jury gets it wrong. And juries aren't infallible. They've made mistakes before. I'm sure they're going to continue to do so. Now, keep in mind that we do need to respect our juries. And so this is not a power that's used frequently. You understand? It's not an everyday thing. It's a pretty rare occurrence when a judge exercises the 13th juror rule. But so that we're not talking about just tossing verdicts willy-nilly here. But it's an important check and balance. As I said, it's better to have the check and balance just to be sure when you're talking about taking someone's freedom away or life. It's not something to be used frequently, but it's something that's important to have. Sometimes mistakes are made. Further, the 13th juror rule is not something that the state Supreme Court just made up. It's there in the statute regarding new trials. It was passed by our legislature. Our elected officials felt that judges should have this check and balance. Now, it's not the role, whether you agree with it or not, it's not the role of a Supreme Court justice or any judge to say, oh, I don't like that law, I'm not going to follow it, or I'm going to just cast it to the side, I'm not going to follow the law. That's totally wrong. Our judges need to follow the laws that the legislature passes, unless they're unconstitutional. Or since Mr. Morose doesn't appear to respect this, at least from what I've been able to see, I'm going to vote for Justice Warren. Next is the Georgia Court of Appeals seat that's being held by Christian Coomer. Again, there are some others that I won't go into. I'm going to vote to elect Judge Coomer. Again, he was appointed for a vacancy, so this will be his first time standing for election to the Court of Appeals. I know Chris Coomer from back when he was a state representative. I worked with him a lot. In fact, after the first time that I spoke to his state legislative committee, at that time, Representative Coomer took me aside personally and he thanked me for doing a good job. And that's how we developed a relationship. I appreciated that, and he's always been strong on the conservative side. No problems at all with life. He was great. He was the majority whip in the Georgia House. Well, one thing that does concern me, though, and I wanted to just address it, is that Judge Coomer joined this outrageously ridiculous Court of Appeals opinion that says if a rape accuser is on the witness stand and she starts crying and she won't continue her testimony, then the prosecution can play a tape of her previous testimony, like a deposition that she may have gave beforehand or a testimony to the police or something. Now, the problem is obviously that the defense can't cross-examine the videotape. So that quite plainly goes against the right to confront the accuser, the right to question the witnesses that are against you, question the accuser. That's obviously a gross violation of due process. I am very surprised that someone as intelligent as Judge Coomer went along with it. It's clearly wrong. It's only one case. And I just noticed a couple of hours ago, he's being viciously opposed by Catherine Bernard, who's this anarchist loudmouth who pretty much hates everyone and everything that doesn't agree with her. So that's a reason I'm saying yes to Christian Coomer. Oh my, all right, Judge Sarah Doyle is running for re-election to the Court of Appeals. And let me just explain, in unopposed races, if you want to vote against someone who's running unopposed, what you do, you have to press write in and then write something like no, or write your own name, or write anyone else, or something, just to register a vote that's not in favor of that person. I want to encourage you to do that in this election, simply because I do hate to say it, but I've practiced at the Court of Appeals for years now. Judge Doyle is not able to reason to the degree necessary to serve as an appellate judge. When you're an appellate judge, it's quite different than being just a trial judge at the county level. When you're an appeals judge, your decisions are written down in an opinion and they become precedent to guide future courts. Your decision therefore needs to explain not only what is the decision, what are we going to do in this case, but why you reached the decision that you did. And that is where Judge Doyle falls far short in my view. It's a matter of basic respect to me, I think. When a lawyer argues a case to you, you have to realize that when we write a brief, we put dozens, scores, maybe hundreds, depending upon the case, of hours of research and writing, shepherdizing our cases, making sure that we're citing appropriate cases, and making an argument based upon the case law that we're finding. It's a matter of simple respect. When you decide a case, you should address that argument and that case law in your decision. Now, you might not agree with the lawyer. Clearly, I know some lawyer's going to lose the case. There's got to be a winner, there's got to be a loser. You might, as a judge, you might look at this and say, okay, this lawyer cited the case of, Smith versus Green. Well, that case is no longer good law because it's been overruled by this case, or something like that. Or you could say, the lawyer cited this case doesn't fit the facts. This fact is different, that fact is different in this case, and that's why this law doesn't apply. That's basic law school stuff. Or you could say, I don't agree with how you're interpreting this case law, and here's why. The here's why is what's important. You don't, as a judge, just ignore the case citation altogether. I think that's disrespectful of the lawyer. Lawyers put a great deal of work into these presentations, especially in an appeals case. When a party loses a case, they deserve to know why they lost. Why didn't this case that I spent 20 hours finding, why didn't it apply here? Judge Doyle doesn't do that. She just ignores the opposing case law and doesn't even mention it at all in the decision. To me, that's very disrespectful. It's not only disrespectful of the lawyer, it's also disrespectful of the real flesh and blood Georgians who are coming to her hoping for wise, well-reasoned judgment. And it's a disservice to the law and to future courts. A future court that's looking at this is going to need to just try to guess for themselves. Why didn't this precedent apply? Why didn't that case apply? Why wasn't this followed? If you don't address it and don't explain it, the future court, it's almost impossible for them to just pull out of thin air, why didn't, what's the reasoning behind this? And so, I hate to say it, I think she had a lot of potential. She was appointed by a Republican, sort of Republican governor. But really, the Court of Appeals in Georgia, and the Georgia Supreme Court to some extent, they'll find whatever reason they can to uphold. They have a high affirmation rate. That's why I derisively call it the Court of Affirmation instead of the Court of Appeals. It's something like 80% of the lower court decisions they affirm. They'll just look for any reason to uphold, and if they can't, sometimes they'll just make up a reason. That's wrong in my view. Appellate judges are not supposed to just sit there with a rubber stamp that says affirmed while collecting a six-figure salary. I mean, that's a waste. They're paid that six-figure salary so that they can engage in meaningful review of cases and to correct lower court errors when lower court errors happen, and they do. You're not going to be able to convince me that only that the lower courts in Georgia, the courts, the superior and state courts, only make errors 20% of the time. Ridiculous. Now, I mean, that's our reputation of our Court of Appeals, and I tell you, Judge Doyle is the worst of the lot, in my experience. I hate to say it, but the quality of her reasoning and her explanation is far below that which I think that we, as taxpayers of Georgia, have the right to expect. And so I am urging you to vote no on Judge Doyle. All right, before we get into the last one that I want to talk about, I'd just like to mention a couple of other ones that are not on my ballot, but that I'd have an opinion on. I am supporting Matt Gertler for Congress. I forget the district Matt's running in. He's not running in mine. As I said earlier, mine is Barry Loudermilk. But he's running for an open seat, and I'm kind of iffy about it because Matt Gertler does tend to lean towards the libertarian end of things, and I think that he takes advice from people that maybe he oughtn't to take advice from. But, I mean, he seems very fair. He's always been very fair with me. He's very conservative, very pro-life, pro-Second Amendment. Those are important. And we certainly need young, passionate people in Congress like that to, sort of counterbalance the young, passionate Alexandria Ocasio-Cortezes. I wish that sometimes Matt would be a little bit more of a team player, more understanding the party system, that sometimes, not everything is an earth-shattering matter of principle that, the world is going to stop turning about. But I don't say go along to get along in every case, but understanding the realities of parliamentary government. But anyway, with that said, I like Matt Gertler, and if he would, I think he's doing a great job in terms of maturing past the say no to everything for any reason approach. And because of that, he has my support for Congress. I'm also supporting Michael Caldwell for State Senate. Again, my senator is Bruce Thompson. Michael is running for the next door Senate seat. And he used to be my state representative before I moved up here to Canton. But Michael Caldwell is great. I've interacted with him a lot. He's very, very friendly, very pro-life. I believe that he has on his biography that he once wrote out the New Testament by hand. I thought that was nice. He's very accessible, willing to do anything for you, an all-around super great guy. I think of maybe one or two policy issues that I disagreed with him about, but 99.9% of issues we are right there together on. And I can't say enough good things about him. He also makes the news very frequently during election time because he's one of those rare politicians that at the end of the election, if he has money that's in his campaign that he hasn't used, like campaign donations that hasn't all been used, instead of keeping a campaign war chest or giving it to other candidates, he'll return that money to his contributors. He'll say, you gave me this money, this is your money, you meant it to be used for me, I didn't use it all, I didn't need it all, so here, you can have your money back. Then if you want to contribute to Senator Smith, who's running down the street, by all means do so. And I think that's great. I think that's very respectful of the voters, respectful of our money, certainly, and that's just a class act, in my opinion. And so, I love Michael Caldwell. Please vote for him. He's great. All right, this is now the last race that I want to discuss, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time on it because I do think it's so important. This is a race I've prayed a lot about, and it's the Cherokee County State Court race where Judge Michelle Homeyer is being, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Homeyer. Anyway, she's being challenged for the second time by an attorney who is complaining that she doesn't always sentence defendants harshly enough. That's really his thrust of his campaign. I am going to support Judge Homeyer. I feel very strongly about it, and I urge you to do the same. I usually don't do that. Usually I just explain why I'm voting for or against someone. But this, I really urge you very strongly to please vote for Judge Homeyer for this seat, and I want to explain a little bit. First, let me say that while I'm an attorney, I don't practice privately anymore. I'm an attorney advisor now with the federal government for Secretary Azar at Health and Human Services. So I don't have anybody in this race that I'm worried about getting on their good side, getting on their bad side. I don't intend to ever see the inside of the Cherokee County State Courtroom. So I can just say it as I see it here. In the 90s, the mantra was tough on crime. Let's be tough on crime. Lock him up. Throw him under the jail. And that was successful at that time because it played on people's emotional fear of crime and their emotional need to see the bad guy punished. And that's fair, but when it's taken to excess, it caused a lot of problems. And our Republican governor and General Assembly have been busy trying to undo some of these excesses. The prison overcrowding, where prison might not have always been the best way of addressing the situation. Not to mention President Donald Trump. I mean, he has been great. Every State of the Union, he's commuting on reasonable sentences. He's refining the law to prevent miscarriages of justice, realizing that maybe an extremely harsh sentence isn't appropriate in a particular case. Maybe something else is more appropriate. Now, that doesn't mean, please don't get me wrong here, because I've been a crime victim myself. Nothing extremely serious, thank God, just my car's been broken into a couple times. But I'm not saying that we ought to be soft on crime, far from it. We need to be fair. Being fair means being fair to all of us citizens who, our right to be free from crime needs to be respected, as well as the defendant's rights. All I'm saying is, and I think Judge Homeyer understands it, I could be wrong, but I think that she does, is that the maximum jail sentence isn't always appropriate in a case. And that the facts of the case may call for a different sentence or a more creative sentence than just throw them under the jail and forget about it. I'm very concerned about the message that we send to other judges if we fail to elect Judge Homeyer for this reason. Because essentially what we're saying to judges is, look, you better rule in favor of the state or your job's on the line. You better hand out the harshest sentence you can or your job is on the line. Now, nothing could be more unjust. When someone is standing before a judge, that judge is not supposed to be focused on what's best for that judge, what's going to make a politician happy. The judge is not trying to save their own bacon. The only thing that should be on a judge's mind is what do the proven facts show and what does the law say. That's it. Now, I understand it's very politically expedient to always be a pro-prosecution judge. I mean, I've seen judges like that. Not around here, really, but I've seen judges like that before. Yes, sir, Mr. Prosecutor. Absolutely, Mr. Prosecutor. You're absolutely right, Mr. Prosecutor. Whatever you say, can I do anything else for you, Mr. Prosecutor? But that's not just. That's not why we have judges. Judges are supposed to protect our rights of victims and the rights of defendants. And when the state tries to overstep its bounds, when they try to violate the law or step over the bounds that the Constitution provides, a judge is supposed to stop it without thinking of how it might harm their chances to get reelected. It's also very concerning to me that the opposition is securing a lot of endorsements from politicians, even though I think Michael Caldwell endorsed the opponent. I love these politicians, but really, even seeking the endorsement of politicians in a judicial race, I'm concerned about. It's inappropriate. Judges are not supposed to be worried about pleasing politicians. That's why we have separation of powers. Lobbyists worry about pleasing politicians. You make the law, you get the law passed. That's where politicians should end. In a courtroom, it should be about justice, not what's politically popular, not what's going to get the judge reelected, but what is right according to the law and the facts. Now, a very similar thing happened years ago, it must be 10 years ago now, in Athens. The very liberal Heidi Davison, mayor of Athens at that time, oh, what a woman. Terrible woman. She, don't get me started on that. But the point is, she fired the city's municipal court judge because she felt that this municipal court judge was not being hard enough on quality of life ordinance sentencing. She was handing out lenient sentences. She replaced her with this truly awful judge whose nickname was Guilty. I mean, I was so proud of myself when I got one of her very rare not guilties for a client. I almost fainted. Anyway, there was a big row about that at the time, and one of the Republican law firms at that time, led by former Representative Regina Quick, they put a "Fire Heidi" sign on its office window because of that, because they were concerned about her stepping into the judicial role there and firing this judge. And the Republican governor put that fired municipal court judge on the state court of Athens, Park County, where she sits today. The point is, judges should be politically independent. They should not rule according to what's going to look good in the papers, or whether they should certainly not be thinking, whether am I going to take heat for this in the next election. It's easy to rule in favor of the state every time, and that'll secure your political future. You be a pro-prosecution judge, you're going to keep getting reelected just as long as you want to get reelected. But it's not the right thing to do. The judge must do justice to the parties in front of her. Finally, well, not finally really, but I'm extremely concerned about something that Judge Homeyer's opponent said. I think it might have been in the last election, but it's still relevant to the issues here. Said, you come in with a second DUI, we're going to give you 90 days. Well, no. I'm sorry. A judge should never, ever prejudge a case. A judge should not even think about sentencing until after hearing all the facts, which include all the circumstances, all the mitigating circumstances, and all the aggravating circumstances. You can't even begin to sentence until you know all the facts. And you can envision any number of scenarios that a judge might see. For instance, let me give you a comparison. How about this? Person A gets a DUI. He's a single parent driving late at night down to the 24-hour pharmacy, a half a mile down the road from his house to pick up medicine for his sick child. He blew slightly over the limit. Okay? Now don't get me wrong, that person committed a crime. It's a DUI, it's not excusable, it needs to be punished. But now compare person B. Person B got a DUI, blew 3 times over the legal limit, drove around for no reason, just for the hell of it, careening around the church district at 10 a.m. on Sunday morning, aiming at people, comes into court wearing a Jack Daniels t-shirt. I mean, you could go on all day. But the point is, should person A and person B be treated exactly the same when it comes time for sentencing? No. I mean, anybody with any sense would say clearly not. Clearly they both committed a crime. Clearly they both need to be punished. But, okay, maybe you could show a little more compassion towards person A, still punishing them, but not the same as the throwing the library at person B. A sentence is supposed to be tailored to the very specific facts of every case, and you can't know the appropriate sentence until you know all the facts of the case. That's why I don't credit any of the opponent's complaints about, oh, she sentenced too low in the Smith case, or she recommended too low of a sentence in this case when she was a prosecutor. I don't know all the facts. And, you know, it's not appropriate to even begin tailoring a sentence until you know the facts. It's not a cookie cutter. It's a very tailored thing. I wasn't present in the courtroom. I don't know the aggravating and mitigating circumstances, but also I want to point out that in those things that the opponent is complaining about, the state didn't even think that the sentence was inappropriate because they didn't appeal. The state has the right to appeal in a criminal case anything but a verdict of not guilty. You can't appeal that. But if the judge makes a mistake in sentencing, sentence is too low, and it's against the law, the state has the right to take an appeal, or to take a writ of certiorari to the Superior Court. the state wasn't that concerned about it. I keep coming back. Those are the reasons I'm voting for Judge Homeyer. Judicial independence. Judges should not be the yes man for the prosecution or the defense, really. They should be fair, fact-based, unbiased judgment and sentencing. And that's why I am for Judge Homeyer. All right, that wraps up the ballot. I think so, yep, no further races on the ballot. So thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you for watching my video. I'm going to put it on YouTube. I'll share on Facebook. Feel free to comment if you like. Please be respectful. I'll delete any comments that are mean. But thank you for listening, and please make sure to go and vote, whether you vote in person or by absentee. As I said at the beginning, there are people who fought and died to give us the right to vote and to preserve our right to vote. And so let's honor their memory by voting thoughtfully and wisely. All right, thank you. Have a great night.